The cost of living has skyrocketed in the past few years, which is why questions about the economy have rocketed into the campaign for president this fall. Today's guest, economist and author Stephen Moore, is a walking textbook on what makes an economy prosper and families financially sound. His take on the dueling economic narratives of 2024 have caught the attention of both major campaigns as they hurtle towards the finish line. From Ballard Studios in Washington, D.C., another special election edition of 13th and Park.
You and I can differ, but that doesn't mean you and I cannot be friends.
That often is missing in politics.
We went from North Korea to M&M. That's a lot, man.
Aliens could have invaded and nothing would surprise me at this point.
It's a nightmare.
Those are the facts.
We have to solve everything.
What's in this tea?
Stephen, great to have you back on the show. In the spring of 23, you were a part of 13th and Park. We've come a long way then, and I have to say, so has the country. Let me start by playing a clip that is from CNBC. Gary Cohn was commenting on the vice presidential debate, where two very, very different economic narratives were laid out for the American public.
I think on the economy, again, I'm not sure we learned a lot. I don't think any new policy was put out. I think this is exactly what Bidenomics is. I think the Harris-Walz team laid out in 82 pages Bidenomics. So now we can call it Harrisonomics. And I think what you've seen from the Trump-Vance team is you've seen a reiteration of what they did in the past. They continue to talk about lowering taxes. They do continue to talk about tariffs. We've talked about tariffs, where they're effective and where they're not effective. They continue to talk about growing the economy. Growing the economy so we have a higher GDP so everyone gets raised up.
Is this a fair assessment of what you might consider the dueling economic narratives in this campaign?
It's a pretty good description of what's happened. I mean, you could not pick two candidates who are more diametrically opposite in terms of their view of where to take America economically than Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. So Trump is a free market guy. He's a businessman. He wants to cut taxes, lower the cost of regulation, get rid of hundreds and hundreds of wasteful and inefficient and redundant government programs. Mm-hmm. He wants to use all of American energy that we can to make America stronger here at home. And Kamala Harris pretty much wants to do the opposite. She wants more taxes. She's got a $5 trillion tax increase. She has all of these new government programs she wants to create. She's going to provide free housing and free healthcare and free childcare and all of these things. People need to remember that when she was in the United States Senate, she was the single most liberal vote, even to the left of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. The proof of the pudding is the eating, as my mom used to say. We know what happened under Donald Trump. We had a very successful economy. We know what happened to Joe Biden. We got massive inflation. We got a massive increase in the debt. And we still have a problem with Americans essentially poorer today than they were 4 years ago.
In the last 12 weeks, we've seen all sorts of what would normally be considered cataclysmic political events, right? We had the first debate between Trump and Biden. We had the two assassination attempts. We had the resignation from the race of Joe Biden, Kamala Harris's rise in the Democratic Party to the nomination, a second presidential debate between obviously Trump and Harris, and most recently the VP debate. Which one of these events, or are there other events that you believe could potentially have dramatic impact in the last part of this race coming from the economic direction or from other events around the world?
Well, I think all of them paint a same picture that America is in chaos and that there's mayhem in this country and there's a lot of incompetence in Washington. I think most Americans realize there's just something fundamentally wrong with what we're doing. I mean, we've racked up $6-7 trillion in debt in 3.5 years in a time of what's supposed to be a recovery. I mean, we borrowed a lot during COVID, and I think we borrowed too much under Trump. But then, Biden came in and added another $6 trillion on top of that. And so I think most intelligent people would agree that this is, this can't go on. You've got termites in the basement that are eroding the foundation of the house. And if people go and vote on abortion or on Trump's behavior on January 6th or the other things that Democrats want to talk about, then Kamala will win. If they are really thinking about their pocketbook and what's, best for the long run economic future of our country, then I think they'll vote for Trump.
You said recently that with over 200,000 people coming over the border, I think it's every month, versus 100,000 available jobs, you have more people who are not citizens of this country chasing fewer jobs. Does that have an ripple economic impact across the board in America?
I think that what's happened at the borders has been a calamity. And I'm very pro-immigration. I think we had a good immigration plan when Trump was in office. It was basically secure the border. Let's finally, make sure the border is secure. And then once it is, then let's let in more immigrants with visas and the documentation, so we know we're not letting in criminals or terrorists or, people who are infirm and can't take care of themselves. But people can contribute to our economy. Look, we're an aging population. We do need more workers. But what's happened is Biden has so contaminated our immigration system that now everybody's just suspicious of anybody coming into the country.
Yeah.
I don't believe immigrants take jobs from natives. They grow the economy, but you can't just dump 50,000 new illegal immigrants into New York City and think that you're going to have the housing or the public services to deal with it. And it's just ruining our inner cities. It's caused mayhem. And even Eric Adams, the Democratic mayor of New York, is saying that, look, we can't do this. We can't pay for all these services for these people.
Right.
And look, I think the illegal immigrants are victims here. Biden's telling, come on in, and then they get here and there's, what are they supposed to do? So it's a very sad situation. I think it's inhumane. And I think Trump had a much better policy. Wait your turn, come in. We're going to be a welcoming country, but you can't just sneak over the border because that's not a country has to have a border.
So for the past year or more, a lot of people have become Fed watchers to see if the Fed was going to cut rates, when they would cut rates, how much they would cut rates. And just recently, they did come up with a half-point rate cut and possibly more to come. But it's 45 days or so out from the election when they decided to push that button. Is that good fiscal policy for America, or is that more political in trying to put the nice shine on things going in to a big campaign verdict?
I think there was a bit of politics that intervened here. And, it's ironic because Jerome Powell always pontificates about how we've got to keep the Fed free of politics.
Right.
And yet he made a decision that came, 45 days or so before one of the most important elections of our lifetime. I could have lived with the 25 basis point decline. I think there was some evidence that was necessary. But they did what Wall Street Journal called a jumbo rate cut. And to me, that's putting the thumb on the scale, pumping all that money into the economy right before an election. I hate to say it, we'd seen some real progress in bringing inflation down. It's starting to creep up again. So I think it was a premature decision, and I think it really smacked of politics.
You got this kind of built-in tension with all this, right? But the impact of most of these things, Stephen, is not going to be felt for a while. Won't be felt in terms of home mortgages all that much. It won't be felt in terms of the price of bread on the shelf. It's going to take a while, right, to filter down. That won't happen between now and the election. So is that the inherent tension, that you've got these things that maybe Team Harris will point to and say, hey, look at these things. These are moving in the right direction. And Team Trump will say, well, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago, even 4 months ago? Is that a kind of a tension that is built in to the economic questions in this campaign?
Is the economy getting a little better? Yeah, but it's still fragile. I described the economy as precarious, and I think that's a way that most people feel about things. And I find it ironic that, in the last debate that Trump had with Kamala Harris, she said, it's time to turn the page. I'm thinking, wait a minute, you guys, turn the page. You guys, you're in the book. You guys have been in charge for 3.5 years. And, I think J.D. Vance made a good point about this. Wait a minute, you keep saying all these great things you're going to do. You've been in charge for 3.5 years. Why haven't you done them? And they don't have any answer to that question.
When the moderators asked Tim Walz, you are advocating, and Kamala Harris is advocating, all these new programs that cost a lot of money. And the CBO, I think, has already come behind that and said, you're talking about another $1.2 trillion in budget expense. But it feels good. Oh, yeah, I'd like to have more money for education, more money for my first home and all the rest. But the reality is we're putting ourselves right back to where Jerome Powell and the Fed probably most fears, which is a budget that continues to explode in terms of spending as opposed to growth that brings in the revenue to pay for it.
The only way we're going to solve this horrendous budget problem, and by the way, I'm not blaming this just on Biden.
Sure.
Both parties have gotten us into this mess, no question about it. And Trump, I've mentioned a lot of the positive things he did for the economy, but when I see the president, that is Trump, I tell him, sir, we spent too much money when you were president. And so it's a bipartisan problem for sure. But there's no way, let me be crystal clear. I don't care how much they talk about how they're going to raise taxes. There's no way you're going to bring this debt down if you don't have a strong economy.
You are very involved, obviously, with the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. I love the name of that group.
Thank you.
And its mission, as I understand it, Stephen, is to try to educate policymakers and the public about the economy so that they can make, hopefully, better decisions.
That's right.
What's the most difficult thing you try to, you might say, teach policymakers and the general public that is a hard thing maybe for both to grasp?
There are a couple things that are hard for people to understand. One is that, it's what Milton Friedman used to say, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. Kamala Harris was proposing free lunches. Everybody's going to have a free lunch. You're going to have free health care. You're going to have free child care. We're going to pay for your student loans, all these things. As you just said, where's the money going to come from? If the government gives you $1, the only way that the government can give you $1 to spend is to take $1 from me. It's that simple. It's not, this isn't complicated. There's no tooth fairy out there. Second of all, free trade. And by the way, neither of these candidates are very good on free trade. And so I worry about the consensus. 15, 20 years ago, we had a pretty strong consensus. I think the NAFTA agreement, making North America a free trade zone, which was Reagan's vision, that was a very positive thing. People have to realize that, that if you put in tariffs, that will probably make things more expensive.
Both campaigns are aiming messages at the same thematic, which is we're going to be very good for the middle class. How do you separate the two, again, dueling narratives and determine if you're in the middle class, where I'm going to get the most help, where I'm going to get the real break? Or is this just rhetoric coming from both sides?
Well, this is a very, very unusual election. It may be the only time in history where you essentially have two incumbents running against each other.
Right.
I mean, Donald Trump was president for 4 years. Kamala Harris has been vice president. You're really looking at these two different paradigms and saying, well, which one, worked better? And so I think that's really what it's going to come down to, is whether people feel like things were better then than now. And, this is a razor-tight election. And there are all sorts of issues that are going to intervene, everything from what's happening in Israel to the abortion issue to social policies to on and on and on, what's happening at the ports. So you never know. And by the way, this is the start of October. The term the October surprise,
Right.
What's going to be the October surprise? Something that could really shift the election one way or the other. The last 4 weeks are the most critical of all.
Well, given everything we've already experienced in the last 12 weeks, Stephen, heaven knows what the next 4 or 5 weeks
exactly.
is going to hold, right?
What could be bigger than this? You're right.
Well, as James Carville, of course, said famously, it's the economy, stupid. I still think the economy drives so many decisions, usually in the cool of night at the end of a campaign. A voter sits down and votes their self-interest. And the economy is usually number one on the chart, and especially when it's in the condition it is now for so many. I think that's where this is all going to come in for a landing. And the question is, do you buy Team Harris's argument about turning the page, as you said earlier in this conversation, and moving forward? Or with Donald Trump, moving forward begins with looking back and seeing when he was president for 4 years, how the economy fared. It is not something that is an easy puzzle for a lot of people to figure out in terms of voter decision-making, but I do think that seems to be the biggest dynamic having to do with the economy that's in play.
I think that's very well put. And, I'm hoping that it is the economy stupid and that's what people look at. But, don't forget, there's a lot of national foreign policy issues to deal with. That's not my area of expertise. What are we going to do about our military? What are we going to do about our national debt? What are we going to do about our schools? I mean, we got failing schools in America. I'm disappointed that didn't come up in either of the two debates about, Trump says, let's give the money to the parents and let them, choose the best schools for their kids. I love that idea. I think it's a great idea, because in the inner cities, what's the old saying from the Negro College Fund? Mind is a terrible thing to waste.
Yeah.
And that is so true. And we're wasting these great minds by depriving them of a quality education.
At the end of the VP debate, in the closing statement from J.D. Vance, he opened up by saying one topic we really haven't done much with tonight is energy. How much is energy and energy policy, Stephen, impactful on the nation's economy and on pocketbooks of people who are here?
This is a really big issue. I mean, again, Trump is all in on producing our oil, our gas, our coal, our nuclear power, all the power that we can get so we don't have to depend on, our enemies like Russia and OPEC and Iran for energy. I mean, we have more energy than any other country. We should use it all. And by the way, that's a great way to reduce our deficit. We produce it here at home. We can tax it. Kamala Harris believes, we're going to run a $30 trillion economy with windmills. I mean, it's craziness. We're going to have blackouts, brownouts. Think about this one. We just had these terrible hurricanes. The grid system went down. At one point, I think 3 million people lost their power. How are they going to power up their electric vehicle? I mean, can you imagine if everybody was forced to buy an electric vehicle and you had a storm like this? People would die. So this is an issue where we really need to put America first. We need to promote American energy, and we should stop with this nonsense that somehow we're going to run our massive industrial economy with windmills and solar power. We're not. We can get some power from them, but we need all our power.
I think the message from the hurricane was buy a generator. Anyway, good luck to you moving forward. Thanks for coming back on the show. Love to have you back after the election to figure out what the election means moving forward. We always say every 4 years, Stephen, the stakes couldn't be greater. I think it's not an exaggeration to say the very same thing about this year.
I agree with that. Thank you so much for having me.
Take care of yourself.